Okay, greetings and welcome to Ligali Live. It's really strange. I can see you on the YouTube page. You might not be able to see me. I think Zoom has decided to only show Oleander's screen. I don't know what that's about. That's a really bizarre one. I don't know. Oh, there we are. We're back. Okay, that's a really strange one there. Apologies for the technical issues. We're still in our new temporary home, whatever it is, which Zoom has decided temporary studio to only show all the gremlins and bugs. Trying to get back to what it's about. It's not going to be quite as smooth as it was before. We built a studio. I don't know. This is kind of right back halfway. But it's good to be back. Strange one there. Try and keep it to a minimum and go through the stories because there's quite a lot to go through. So the echoes are back. So I'm going to, hopefully that's got rid of the echoes. So please let me know online if there's any problems with the audio, the sound, because I can't actually hear it from your side, and everything looks perfect from where I am. And also I'll keep an eye on the YouTube. If there's any issues, please don't be shy to flag them up. So where are we? Okay, so I said I'm going to start off with the ungrateful savage narrative, which is actually returned back to the British Isles. And this is a story where there's people who come to the UK from other communities outside Europe are often told, like, well, if you don't like it here, why don't you go back to your own country, you know, that kind of stuff. Or, you know, like, you know, we took you in, we fed you, blah, 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 and now you won't do this for us and you're calling us racist and all that. And it's really a time-old narrative. We saw it playing out in a strange way with the 2020 Euros, whereas we saw Rashford, Sancho, and Saka kind of like one moment elevated to national champions because they were kind of like this beautiful image of diversity for the English football team. And then once they lost the penalties, they were denigrated and kind of like, you know, why don't you leave and what are you doing here kind of stuff. And this is all part of the ungrateful savage narrative. If you come here, you must perform for England, and you know, you must do your utmost best. Now, I'm not a football expert, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about football, but I did want to start with this particular story to set the tempo for what's going to be discussing this week. And essentially, there's been a couple of stories about Hudson Odoi and Mason Greenwood, who are football players who, you know, who've been called to play for England in recent times over the last week or so. And what's happened, they've actually said, well, you know what, we're not ready for that quite now. And actually, I'm going to play for Ghana. I'm thinking about playing for Jamaica. But, you know, we definitely, it's a privilege to play for the national team. We'll be back. But right now, we're not ready for that spotlight. And what's happened is that you can see the mainstream media, particularly the Daily Mail, has actually come out and started saying the peer rejected England call-ups. And it's kind of like this idea that how dare you place anything else, any other nation above the UK, or I should say England, because it isn't actually UK, it's quite specifically England. And this is all part of the ungrateful, savage narrative. Like I said, I'm not going to go on about this, but I wanted to set the tone about, you know, of this week with this, because Ligali Live, we tend to do the news stories over the last couple of weeks. And even though we take a UK focus, it is a Pan-African program. So we will talk about things as it intersects our community around the world. And so the next story, which is UK based, is definitely to do with sports. And it's a really huge story over the last week or so. And this is that of Azeem Rafiq. Now, Azeem Rafiq made some complaints about racist abuse he was facing inside the Yorkshire Cricket Club. His complaints were investigated, and a group of people decided that there'd be no disciplinary action taken against anyone, not a player, and against, not against an executive, not against anyone. And you know, he was totally unhappy about this, and the story just kind of like went away. And then I don't know what happened, but with African History Month, perhaps there was something to do with that. I don't know, but it came back into the media, this story. And this time, when people heard about the racist abuse that he was facing from high-level team players and from inside the institution itself, sponsors of the cricket team, or, you know, Yorkshire Cricket Club, started to pull out. I'm not going to name the sponsors, but they started saying, well, actually, if you're going to rough him up like this and you're dealing with racism like this, then we don't want to be part of, we don't want our brand associated with you. And this triggered a cascading effect within Yorkshire Cricket Club, where the chair, and I think it's up to 3, it might be 2 or 3, but I think it's up to 3 different board members or trustees decided to resign. And this is really unprecedented, because normally when it comes to issues of racism, nobody really resigns. I mean, and then the story gets worse, because there's another player, an Asian player, has spoken up and actually said, well, things weren't, that was the tip of the iceberg. What was happening with Zim Rafiq. He actually says that he was actually urinated on by a teammate. So the situation is outrageous in that cricket club. And so we're seeing all of a sudden like this national discourse about what is racism, how come cricket remains its last bastion of racism, and we're seeing people resigning and pulling out. But at the same time as we're seeing these changes, we're seeing the old guard get back to its usual tricks. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about the ex-chairman, because he's resigned now, Roger Hutton, well, he stepped down and he's saying that, look, I was there for like several months, and while I was there, no one at Yorkshire was racist. No one he defined. And this is really the classic kind of defense. It's like people are kind of like using naughty words, but they're not actually racist. They're, even though there's there's a call for an investigation into allegations, they're not racist. Just even though the person feels racially abused, there's no racist. And I want to underpin that point, that this action that we're seeing now isn't taking place because of racism, because of the racist abuse. We're seeing responses like this. We're seeing action because of money, because the corporate sponsors have pulled out. And that's what's made a difference in this case. I can't talk about what made a difference that brought it up to national focus again, because I think the story is almost a year old. But that's the story there. And on Thursday just gone, I didn't see the program, but it kind of like blew up all over Twitter. One of the questions that emerged on BBC flagship political program Question Time was actually the ridiculous, kind of query: is, can a racist term ever be defined as banter? And I mean, all of you who are watching and kind of like understand, where I'm going with this, I don't need to explain that. We know this is kind of like a sidebar towards a discussion about the N-word and who uses it and who can't use it. But the point is that if we know something is racist, if we're saying can a racist term, then we know that it's not banter. But just the fact that the mainstream program, and you've got to remember that Question Time is the flagship political program. Newsnight is big, but Question Time is the one. It tells you about the culture towards racism in the UK that still hasn't really changed. I'm going to move on. There's still other stuff to go that's related to this, but just double checking everyone can still hear us okay. I hope you're all fine. Please drop a chat or join on the Zoom. Oleander is here with me. Sorry you can't quite see her online. I think she can hit her screen on and she'll flash up and stuff like that and give a wave. But we are live. If you go in the Zoom, meeting code 933-9090-5028, you can have a chat with her and join on. I'm not going to try and bring the Zoom into YouTube, and I think we're going to have to make a call, bite the bullet, and just forget about the Zoom in the future. That's what's been causing the problem. We're trying to get this integration working smoothly. But yeah, I'm going to keep going on, and thank you, Oleander, for holding the fort as well. So, where's this all leading to? I mean, we had this national discussion about racism over the last couple of days. So what's the government doing on this? Well, the Equalities Minister, you may remember her, Kenny Badenoch, she is going around on a program, I think it's the one with Trevor Phillips on Sky News, telling people that actually Black History Month is now becoming Racism History Month. Why are people talking about racism? It's like, Black History Month, like, just about tolerating that. But when people start talking about racism, what's the point? Maybe we should ban Black History. She didn't say we should ban Black History Month. But this is the point that she's trying to allude to. And then she goes on to continue that actually, the celebration of African history and culture was actually an American import. What's it doing in the UK? And this is, the same equalities minister who, calls talking about white privilege a criminal offence, who signed off on the sewage report and saying that there's no institutional racism in the UK. We've just seen this in the Yorkshire Cricket Club, but obviously institutional racism doesn't exist. And if you believe the leaks from her WhatsApp account, she's actually been reported as saying that actually colonialism, why are we all fussed up about colonialism in Africa? I mean, it's just a story about winners versus losers. So, I knew what the Africans were doing before the Europeans came, so I don't really care about colonialism, And this is the Equalities Minister. Really important to remember that. And I like this link to a story. And thank you, Brother Colin, for sharing some of the stories with us this week. That was really helpful. And he shared a story which makes a really, really good point, is that the Yorkshire Cricket Club storm about racism isn't about individuals. This is one of the problems I have. When we talk about racism, it's often framed into, oh, this person said a naughty word. And and that's the reason why we're getting all upset. And that actually demeans racism. That demeans Afrophobia, demeans the actual discussion that we're trying to have. What this should be focused on is not whether it's banter, but it's why did the institutions fail to address the original complaint? Why did it take, the pullouts of major sponsors for anything progressive to start looking like it's going to take place? That's the issue at hand. That's institutional racism. That's the structural violence that's taking place that we're not discussing. And whenever we focus on the individual acts, like the urinating on a player, the using of the P word on another player, kind of like all the different microaggressions. And I'm not saying for one moment that we tolerate them. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the biggest crime here, alongside that, is the institutional response, that it was aware of all these factors and it did absolutely nothing, and it gaslit those who are being abused. And until we're dealing with those issues, these problems won't go away. And so this week, a lot of stories seem to follow this trend, and that wasn't me deliberately looking for them. These are just what's taken place over the last 2 weeks. So let me do a quick journey across the pond. So there's this report. Somebody put together a report to this study. I think it's around 2,000 African American men. They chose men particularly, not because African American women don't struggle with racial discrimination, but African American men in America, at least, are overrepresented in suicidal statistics. And surprise, surprise, they found out that actually, where people are racially discriminated, or African American men, that what's happening is that there's this great association with depression, and there's higher rates of suicidal thoughts, sometimes leading to thoughts. Not just African American men, I should make it clear, it's also African American children. And so they concluded that addressing the pernicious effects of chronic racial discrimination and other daily environmental stresses are neglected public health concerns. And that's, again, something that we're quite familiar with. There's no real sustained research into what do these environmental stresses, the pressures that we deal on a day-to-day basis, what do they do to our well-being? What do they do to increase our propensity for depression and ultimately suicide? This isn't something that's unique to African Americans. This is something that occurs on a global scale, especially in nation states where there's Afrophobia. So, what's happening in the UK? Well, just take a snapshot. Somebody put a question out on Twitter and asked, well, can some brothers give us a story or give us an idea or some stories of, some racism they face in the nightclubs? So, basically you're going out to socialize, to enjoy, to de-stress. What kind of issues are you facing? That was a really simple question, and they were bombarded with responses. There were some 4,000 responses that came back to the question. I'm obviously not going to read the 4,000 responses here. I've put a couple of up here. There was a story. There was a man who said he was not allowed into the venue because his trousers weren't ironed well enough. There was another who said he was denied entry to a club because his jeans were too baggy, even though they were a fitted style. Another one said that his shirt was the wrong style. And there's this really interesting exchange that took place in the Independent article that covered this. And it reads that one dude in the line who wasn't an African was like, bro, you might as well have just told him to take his skin off at the door. And then the bouncer, who actually apparently felt guilty, said, oh, okay, look, you can come in. But the reality was that the racism that was actually expressed was already there, it was already exposed. And this is just a snapshot of what's taking place in a space where people go to socialize, to actually de-stress. So you got to remember, you can't even get admission to nightclubs without actually facing racist gatekeeping and policing. So that's, this was a story that came out like a few days ago, and it gets worse. Across the UK, if we go outside London, this one's in Suffolk, there was this so-called race riots. And I say so-called because it's quite a contentious. This is a story that came out like a few days ago, and it's worse. Right, I can yeah. Well, then, did you say something? Later on, across the UK, if we go outside London, this one's in Suffolk, there was this so-called race riots. I say so-called because it's quite a contentious. This is a story that came out like a few days ago.
I just wanted to say that in terms of people going into nightclubs, I actually heard this about some women saying that because of their size, they're discouraged from going into certain nightclubs. Can you hear me? Because they were, quite larger ladies, and they were discouraged from going into a nightclub. And then also I actually heard sisters too, who saying, colorism effectively, because they were dark in shade, and again they were discouraged from going into clubs, certain clubs, and they were discouraged from a certain look. So and then also I was quite skinny, quite skinned and things like that too. And it was quite upsetting for them. And I think that these things, and again, we're experiencing these things in all different walks of life in clubs, and it's really sad because, like you said, you go to a club, you want to de-stress, you want to have a good time, enjoy yourself with your friends, and then this happens. It's just quite upsetting, really terrible. And I think that these things.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, no, you're right. I mean, like I said, these surveys were just happening to be looking at men. But this happens across the board, different ages, different genres, different environments. It's not just nightclubs. I think we spoke last week about a situation in a restaurant, and unfortunately, it's one of those problems that these ones are underreported. I think that's what's worse about it. We don't actually know. I think we have to tip of the iceberg when it comes to how often these microaggressions go on. So when someone puts something on social media asking for some anecdotal tales, they get bombarded with information. Again, I was just about to go into this story over here about this pub sign, and this was I don't know if you can see the image, the King's Head. There's actually an effigy of someone hanging on there. Now it's quite a strange one. I did read the story, and I can't quite say 100% that this is actually a case of Afrophobia. I think that the face is supposed to actually be orange, and they turned the body upside down afterwards and hanged it from its feet to kind of like stop triggering people and stuff like that. But it's also just a disgusting. It's not funny. It's not. I don't understand why people would say that this is kind of think this is acceptable to actually do that. They're saying they get into the spirit of Halloween, and that the people who are complaining about it are pathetic. But I think there's something wrong with the people who are doing this. And what's bizarre in this particular case, and I say bizarre, but it's something we had to be mindful of recognizing, is that this was actually a pub that's owned by a diverse group of people. So it's not just as simple as, and it's going to sound really corny, as being an issue of black and white. It really is. It really is one of those strange situations where a lot of us are socialized and racialized in a way that we perpetuate some of these abusive terms. Just be aware. Thank you, Deep Set. Just seen the message. Just be aware. Echoes and glitches talking with Zoom integration. Right. So Thank you for that. One of the things we're going to be mindful for whenever we come in on the Zoom, the echoes comes back and forth. So I'll try. I still want to try and get that integration in place, but we'll have to find a way to do it a bit smoother. I think this might be the last week we do the Zoom, but it's really cool having Walianda in the studio, kind of like on point, because she brings a perspective that I just don't have as well. So I want to find a way around that. I mean, when we're back, then we won't have these technical issues in our space, but that might not be for a couple of months at least. So I'll think on that. I'll see how we can resolve that as a technical issue. But I'm going to move on with the story. Thank you for that. And again, just like I was mentioning, that this is not a male issue, and that there's a gendered quality to this one. It's like, I don't know if any of you are familiar with this story, but again, this one is only a few days old. And this is a tribunal that took place about a Mayfair casino, where our sister here was told by a customer that they didn't want her to serve her because she wasn't light enough. And so what happened was that the casino actually said, oh, okay, we'll have someone else kind of like deal with you and serve you in the casino. And the tribunal actually found in favor of her and actually recognized that this exclusive casino had racially discriminated against her. And this is really important, because I don't know if many of you remember, there was an amazing nurse called Rosie Purves back in the day, and she was racially abused while she was working in NHS. You actually had patients saying, well, I don't want, these darkies or whatever terms they were using at times to be giving me healthcare. I don't want to be treated by a nurse who's African. I don't want anyone who's coloured. I mean, these are obviously these antiquated terms they were using. And she was amazing. She just kept on working. But I think, I find her inspirational, but I think we're now, due to the efforts and the work that she's done in highlighting these challenges and pushing back and kind of like knowing when to say, I'm not going to do anything, not going to work with this, and kind of like exposing these things, we're now at a stage where we recognize that we have to detoxify these working environments. And if someone tries to do that and the employer supports that kind of Afrophobia, then we need to push back. And so it is good that a tribunal challenged this and actually found in favor of our sister. And so this is, again, another story. I don't think many people have heard of this one. Again, this is only a couple of days ago, but these are real cases that are happening. But what's nice about this one is that, it's not actually dealing with the individual customer per se. I mean, even though that's another issue, it's dealing with the institution. That's what makes it important, that the fact that the institution facilitated the racism, that's the problem. And that's where we must start to also deal with the issue. We deal with the individuals causing the problem, but we must simultaneously deal with the institutional systems at play. And that's the sort of thing I'm looking at doing with City Hall, but more about that later. And so I talked about institutions and some of the tricks that they get up to. And the Barbican has actually said it's going to introduce diversity targets, and this is following, similar to the Yorkshire Cricket Club, complaints about racism. So there are staff who are saying that the Barbican is a bullying organisation, that it engages in Afrophobic and other racist activities. I don't have much detail on the particular instance, but I think after Black Lives Matter, they were one of the organizations that came out saying that we are anti-racist, blah 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 blah. You can see the things here. We will set diversity targets for our workforce. We'll make sure that we look like the community that we serve, blah 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 blah. We're committed to being anti-racist, not bullying. And I wanted to include this story in this week's report just simply because sometimes we forget that these institutions have been so used to owning the narrative, owning the script. We are going to set diversity targets. We are going to be anti-racist. We're going to do this, and they use that language really well, and nothing actually fundamentally changes. And so it's really important that we kind of like become wise to that we don't start thinking that a diverse white workforce is actually an anti-racist workforce. Of course, a diverse workforce increases the odds that it will be more sympathetic to anti-racist work. But as we've seen with this government, as we're, like the words of Kemi Badenoch, Trevor Phillips, Tony Sewell, and all these kind of people, Kwasi Kwarteng, ethics is in short supply at this particular moment in history. And just because someone looks like us, I'm talking to African audience here, looks like us, doesn't have any guarantee that they're actually going to be behaving with the same ethical values that we'd expect them to behave with. And so this is why the Barbican can make these statements, but we've got to be careful that we don't lean on the idea of diversity targets as a qualifier for true anti-racist work. We can tell by the change in institutional practices that really bring about the eradication of corruption in these systems. And that's what really this is about. It's actually about corruption. But again, I'll elaborate on that a bit later, because unfortunately some of the stories still stick to this theme. So you are with me, Ligali Live. I'm Toyin. Go to Ligali Live, was it the 7th of November 2021. We're just going through the news for the last couple of weeks. And I mentioned corruption, and this story really shows you what happens when corruption, kind of like goes unfettered. And some of you may be aware of a case of the Oval 4, and this is only one of these kind of cases, the Stockwell 6, odious cases of miscarriage of justice, where a police officer, in particular in this case, DC Derek Ridgewell, had been involved in manufacturing evidence, planting evidence, setting people up, leading to the conviction of innocent people. And it's been a horrible case of affairs. I mean, we're about to see something, well, hopefully we won't see something take place in America, but I mean, this continuing trend of corruption, that's what it is when those people in a position of authority don't have a mechanism with which to hold them to account. We saw this with Parliament when they tried to delete or to vote out and eradicate parliamentary scrutiny and legislate against it. This happens every day in boards and directors, boardrooms, directors, politics, sportsters. This particular story is one that we should be quite pleased with, because I mean, not the duration of time, how long it took, but simply the work of Brother Kwaku from BTWSC did some amazing work pushing and highlighting this issue, and speaking with Winston True, who's one of the Oval 4 who was wrongfully convicted, went to jail. His life fell apart after that, and said that, look, it's all very well that you now finally recognize these injustices. Thankfully, it wasn't the death penalty, or they wouldn't be alive to speak about it. But actually, you haven't just hurt me as an individual. As an institution, you've actually hurt our community. You've wounded us. And if you're going to apologize, that apology should be extended beyond just the individual. And following Kwaku's pushing, putting this to the British Transport Police, who were responsible for Derek Ridgewell, he got a response which read, on behalf of the British Transport Police, I'm sincerely sorry for the trauma suffered by the British African community through the criminal actions of former police officer DC Derek Ridgewell. And this is, registered his work that he did in the 1960s and 1970s to subvert and criminalize African people. They say that this is simply inexcusable, and it's something that they are completely appalled by. And I think Kwaku and Winston, they push for some kind of a bursary to help students who want to investigate criminology to be set up. And so they're looking into that. And of course, this drive into diversifying the police force, or this time the British Transport Police, is one of the other results that's said to be coming out of this. And I just really, first of all, want to big up Brother Kwaku for his amazing work in actually claiming this forward and getting this response out of them, and actually just doing the due diligence that we don't take our eye off the ball. You see, often what happens is that we have this thing about, the passage of time, kind of like it lessens. It's a long time ago. But then there's an African proverb, you've probably heard me say it a long time if you're a supporter of Ligali, where I said the passage of time does not lessen the crime. And so even though these crimes took place in the 60s and 70s, if we haven't had an apology to the community, if we haven't had some form of reparation, we haven't had some form of justice, then it's our responsibility and those of our children and their children and their children to keep pushing forward on these issues until we start seeing justice. Nothing's going to take back or return back the time that many African people who are innocent have spent in jail, and the damage that's been caused to their family lives, to their well-being. There's nothing that can ever repair that. But what we do need to do is make sure the institutions learn that they cannot carry on these corrupt ways and do it again. So I know that's a long diatribe for a simple story, but it's a really important story. Some of you will know that I have a vested interest in addressing abuse of police. Somehow I still don't have a criminal record, despite every attempt by police officers to give me one. I've been assaulted, tasered, beaten up, locked up. I've had evidence fabricated against me. I mean, I can tell you, I had a jury kind of like decide to side with the police, even though I was innocent. And it's really hard to eradicate the corruption, but yet we still must keep fighting. And one of the things that that made me brought a smile to my face was reading now this article by Tom Windsor, who's who's a former. Well, I don't know if he's a former, but I recognize him as some kind of watchdog for the police. And one of the things he proposes, which I really love the idea of, and it's in line with one of the things that I believe should happen, was that he says that there should be a random WhatsApp and social media testing of police officers, just like they do with drug testing. And I actually agree with this one. Not blanket. I think you have to kind of like target police officers who are flagged up on the radar of having caused offence or kind of like shown low qualities of ethical standards and poor behaviour. But I like the idea of this kind of like an internal stop and search to weed out, as he says, misogyny and racism. The challenge is I don't know, privacy. Even police officers are entitled to a level of privacy, but he does make a very good case, which is that because police officers have this extraordinary authority, that they hold a privileged position in society, and their actions can cause so much damage, that this expectation for random checking of their social media is proportionate. And I think he's got a good case. It's something that I would like to kind of like work on and discuss and figure out a way to sanction that. My only worry is that I know that the police force in the UK disproportionately attacks African people inside the service, and something like this could actually be used to persecute innocent, good, decent police officers. And that's something where we need to have checks and balances in place. But I just thought I'd share that story because we don't hear these stories. These stories are out there. This is all within the last 2 weeks, right? Don't hear them, but they're very, very important. And this discussion about stop and search, but not stop and search on the street, but stop and search on your WhatsApp for police officers. This should be national discussion. As a nation, people should be discussing: should we do it? If we do it, how do we do it? How do we make it? How do we make it proportionate? We recognise that what happened with the sharing of the pictures of Nicole and Bieber, it was just disgusting and beyond what they say, beyond the pale. But it was precisely the pale. How do we address that? So I just thought I'd share that with you as well. Which leads me to probably the case that is really dominating US television communities right now. It's really interesting how there's nothing about it in the UK, other than a couple of short stories now and then, but this is the biggest story in America at the moment. And this is the case of Ahmed Abre's murder. I don't know if you know this story, but he's a 25-year man jogging. This happened in February 2020. Jogging in a particular area, and a group of men decided that he fitted the suspect of a potential robber, and so they hunted him down. These weren't police officers, let me be clear about that. They hunted him down. He's just jogging. Yeah, what's that phrase? You know, that driving while African, or this is jogging while African. He's just jogging. They hunted him down. They hit him with their vehicles, and there was a scuffle. And then one of them had a shotgun, and they said that they thought that he was going to hurt him, and so they murdered him. They shot him with a shotgun and took his life. And I haven't watched the video. Police came, and did the police give medical care and attention to him? No, they were just there chatting with the suspects. And the suspects, one of them filmed this on their mobile phone. And they were so confident that what they were doing that would have impunity, that nobody would actually dare think there was anything wrong with it. They shared on social media. They shared them murdering an innocent African for just jogging on social media. And so when it initially happened, they were unable to go home. It's only because they shared the video that a couple of months later, they were arrested after protests. So for those people who say things like, oh, protesting doesn't matter, it's kind of like people who protest get on my nerves, etc., blah, 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 blah. Well, hold on. No, protesting does matter, because that's one of the ways that we can highlight outrageous, disgusting incidents such as this. And then I say try because the criminal justice system in America is just as corrupt as one over here, but we can try to bring them to justice. And the reason why I say corrupt, the reason why I say that is because the trial is taking place. I don't know if you've been following it. If you have, great. If you haven't, you might know that they just kind of like selected the jury, and it's a South state. This is in Georgia. And a history of KKK. And there's only one African person, from what I can hear, what I can tell, on the jury. The rest of them are European. So I think there were 14 offered out of the 45 jurors, and all of them, apart from one, were rejected. And so what's really becoming clear is that the state of Georgia, the physical presence, the spiritual energies, I know people think that's a bit strange, but there is something in that. The whole group have this collective idea in power and emboldening the spirit of whiteness, have actually shifted the criminal justice system to move and exclude jurors who may have actually brought a level of diversity of principles and justice and ideology and life experiences to deliberations on this case. Even the judge recognizes that there's something wrong with the fact that there's only one African-American juror on the jury. So we're going to keep seeing what happens. But yeah, this is an awful story. And this is, again, this week. Did you hear about this one? So last week, someone asked me about COVID. I know I don't talk a lot about COVID on this particular channel and stuff, but there was this story that came out. It came through Nature Genetics. It's one of the nerdy journals I subscribe to and stuff. And but even I missed it in my inbox because I get so many emails, I just can't read them all in time. So I mean, it bubbled up and I saw it, and I saw the headline. I said, I've got to read it. I did try to read it, and there's the links there. I mean, well, not the link, but you can see that the journal on the right, identification of L, TFN01. That gave me a headache trying to read it, but I did read the summary. I did read the intro, and the gist of what this was that they identified there's this high risk gene, which is more common in people who are racialized or recognized as South Asian, I've got other groups, and I can't remember the statistics now. It's a bit silly of me not to put it inside here, but if I remember correctly, it's quite high. It might be 15-20% of people who are Asian, and it's like 1.4% in Europeans, the percentage, and 2% of people who are African. And so it's quite a big proportionality, and it's kind of suggests that this is why the case of fatality is far higher in Asia. I know it's a really technical blog, and I'm sorry I don't have all the details in front of me. It was quite a difficult read, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not really into this Genesis language. It's not my area of specialism, but there is something to be said that there's a 30%, I think it was like either between 15 and 30%. It's quite high. Remember, it's a huge amount of people of South Asian heritage. It didn't impact the same on people of East Asian heritage, which was quite interesting. And yeah, and I'm just sharing it out there because, again, this kind of stuff, this kind of research, which we don't hear much about, and it's really important for us to just have it in the back of our mind, cognizant of what's going on, kind of helps formulate the plans that are used to protect communities and identify who's vulnerable, who's not, what mitigating factors need to be doing, and what environmental issues might be exacerbating kind of deaths. So that's that story. I know this isn't a medical journal channel, but all of these things, regardless of whether we think they're discrete, it's the Asian community, they are linked to all of us. We are all impacted in this. And again, just like I said in last week's one, when I did another study on that, I shared that. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean that there's a gene in people who are South Asian that causes them to have COVID or higher rates of morbidity at COVID. It just tells us that when we study the millions of deaths that are taking place, that's what we're finding out. So there's something there. What it is, I don't think anyone knows there, but we're finding out that people of South Asian heritage are at increased risk of respiratory failure. And that's really what causes death when it comes to COVID. It's pneumonia and respiratory failure of the organs. Enough technical stuff. Let's try and see if I've got any good news stories. I think we're coming close. Oh, no, I don't have good news stories. Okay. Right. So what's this one? This one's about climate change, really. Thank you, Brother Colin, for sharing this one. I mean, I've been teaching quite a bit on what's happening with COP9, or was it COP26? I can't remember what they call themselves this week. And this is the discussion with worldwide worldwide politicians, kind of like going around the world, talking about what they're going to do to save the world, climate change, blah, 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 and making all these grand statements and how concerned and how worried they are about climate change. And, one of the things is that, the people that you see, the G20, saying that they've got to be serious about this stuff, they're responsible for over 70 to 80% of the damage that's taking place on this planet in the first place. So it's a bit rich. And one of the things we had to remember is that when they talk about climate change, they're talking about what they're seeing are financial opportunities, not to save the planet, but to cripple their economic competitors. So to place regulations that can hamper their development and growth. It's not to say that climate change isn't a serious issue that we should be looking at, but it sits there alongside dealing with issues of racism, dealing with issues of sexism. These are things that have not been resolved, that need to be resolved alongside climate change and the abuse of animals and all these kind of things. They all are in the same trajectory. And what's happening is that right now, the biggest threat at the moment is climate change, and it stops discussions about institutional racism. And so this article that Brother Colin shared with me was about climate change is Nigeria's chance to free itself from the tyranny of oil. And it's quite a good story. I think it was Open Democracy, so if you're looking for it. And it just talks about really how Nigeria's dependency on oil is artificial. The fact is that Nigeria is the 11th largest oil producer, and yet it spends millions and millions and millions of pounds importing oil after it's been refined. And this is ridiculous because Nigeria has healthy deposits, but it was British companies that prevented it from from British imperialism that prevented it from refining itself. And now we find people in rural Nigeria are using low-tech like wood to heat food if they haven't got access to petroleum. They have got, they're using their generators have gone down. And so the misery that's been caused through history is impacting many communities. I'll just use Nigeria as an example today. And we have to always be mindful that when these nations, the leaders from, in these big G20, COP26 kind of like jamborees start saying that we all have a responsibility, blah, 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 blah. They are not thinking solely about saving the planet. They know that everything that they're talking about is going to have a huge financial cost, and they have profited from the damage to the planet. This is what they do. Most indigenous communities, most kind of like grassroots communities that are in the global south recycle, have been recycling for decades, if not centuries. And I remember being at an age, when I was a young boy, I must have been, maybe, I don't think I was a teenager, when we used to watch the Captain Planet cartoon. And Captain Planet was an eco-warrior. So this discussion about saving the world isn't new as they're making it out. So just as you remember, that was a big thing. The ozone layer was a big thing, and it dies away, and then they go to something else. This is what I call faddism. It moves to the next fad, to the next fad, to the next fad, and it comes back round. We are in the cycle of faddism. So, this is why I asked the question: can this massive fervor over climate change erase toxic legacies? Well, it can, but it won't, unless we get to a position where we remember what's taken place in the past. So now onto some hopefully positive news. This was a strange one. I found this completely by chance, actually. This was there was an advert. I don't know what channel this came out on, but it was actually apparently. I don't do the first blacks. I hate that. But this was actually one of the first adverts in the UK ever to promote in a positive way African women's hair. I mean, that's it. It doesn't sound really remarkable, especially if you've been around the globe and you've seen places where African people have some kind of political power. But actually, this is a good thing. I mean, we're starting to see some diversity and representation in the UK, but apparently this advert was specifically about African women's hair, targeting and going natural. It was made by Afrocentrics, which is an organisation. I think one of the founders actually was an anthropologist. She studied anthropology at the university I work at, UCL, and really good on that. And it's it. I don't know what else to say. It's a good news story. I know it sounds silly. It's an advert selling products. It's inside the captain's thing, but it's just this idea that recognizing that it's okay to talk to ourselves. It's okay to say we are normal. It's okay to represent our natural hair in a way that that doesn't become some kind of like, I don't know, what's that, exotic kind of trope. Well, I don't know how long I've been going on for. I'm getting a bit tired. I think we're close to the end. I think this is the last slide. So this one, maybe I'm a little bit biased. Some of you will know, I've been working with Hackney Council for a little while on its program to detoxify the public realm. And there's been some amazing people on that journey. Like we're talking about teachers, we're talking about activists, we're talking about researchers, we're talking about, I mean, just people inside the council, people inside archivists. I mean, it's been amazing to be with people. And one of the first fruits of this work was the renaming of the former garden, which was named after the enslaver John Cass, and it's actually been renamed now the Kit Crowley Gardens. This took place on Thursday. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it down there, but I heard that our brother in Goma was there. There was some cultural artists there, and Kit Crowley's son was there. And I'm really proud I'm just really proud to be involved. You can see Carol Williams, she's the counsellor for equalities, who's there with the children. And I guess what I'm really proud is it's not about just taking down a toxic symbol of someone who represents the enslavement of our ancestors and just kind of like most vile and anti-human values in a public space. But it's also the addressing it in an equitable manner. So Kit Crowley was a woman in the area. She's not known outside the area like as some kind of famous activist or something like that. She was just a good, decent human being. She loved the children. She worked at a nursery, and the people in the area just loved her and recognised that she kept their children safe and healthy and their well-being. And actually, to have a park named after someone who actually just cared about children and cared about representing, people of African heritage in a way that they didn't feel ashamed of who they were, is awesome. And for me, the magic is that we recognize that we don't need to always have statues and signs and effigies and all these kind of stupidness to people who are rich, people who are famous. That actually you and I are worthy of being remembered or of being honored, of being treasured, of just kind of like just acknowledging our existence. And so I want to close with that one. Like I said, I'm sad I couldn't make it, but you can see the photos and you can go online and find out more information. Again, it's not going to be on the national news because people don't think that these kind of things are important, but I think they are really important. One of the things I always say about my activism is that I deal with things on two levels. I deal with things on a symbolic level and a systemic level. And so systemic level is the hard stuff. This is like me going to court, judicial review against City Hall. And then hopefully, I'll probably lose. That's life. They'll fine me 40 grand. I'll have to deal with that one when it comes. But what happens is that all the Afrophobic policies, all the treating us like second-class citizens in London and not treating our remembrance of African history and of our freedom fighters after Arthur and the Haitian Revolution with the respect it deserves, all that actually now becomes official record. And if I have to just kind of like pay off every single month a fine to kind of like, excuse me, because it gets me emotional, I am angry about it. If I had to pay a fine to kind of like get that history recognized and to start inscribing inside the institutions policies, that means that when we have remembrance days for our community, that you can't just pick and choose who's going to represent and just discard them at your political whim. You can't use racist processes to decide kind of like, which stories can be told and which ones can't be told, who can we listen to and who we can't do. Once that's gone through, for me, it's worth it. All the pain is worth it. So, I'm going to leave it there because the whole thing still makes me angry. It's weird that it's not even a Daily Mail or the Sun or the Telegraph, all these racist papers that are dealing with me at this particular moment in time. It's actually supposed to be our friends like Sadiq Khan in City Hall that is actually attacking me. But that's the nature of the game. That's where we're at. That's what we will deal with. So that's the point. That's the systemic change. This is the symbolic change, and this stuff matters. So let me sign off. Thank you for bearing with us with our technical issues. Hopefully we'll be back in another couple of weeks. I think we really do need to stick with YouTube only. Maybe I could do YouTube and Facebook or something. That means it's a one-way communication. You can see us, but we can't have you come in. I don't know any other way around it because the technical problems seem too much, but I will find a way to fix it. So certainly as when I move out of here and we're back home, we'll find a way to fix the problem. I want anyone to always be able to come into this program and share. So please be safe, be loving, and as always, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.